take your seat. Dear colleagues, please take your seat. So, thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, Minister of State of South Asia and the Commonwealth, Madam Secretary General, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's my true honor to open today's plenary session. And I would like to say welcome, particularly to those of you who haven't attended an annual session before. I would like to start this meeting in honor of our former colleague, former president of OSCE PA, Mr. Ilkka Kanerva. Mr. Ilkka Kanerva passed away the 14th of April this year. Mr. Kanerva has been a long-standing member of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. He has served as president during 2015 and 2016. In the Finnish Parliament was he the longest standing member. He has served as minister in several governments. He was very dedicated to serve the people in his constituency. Also to serve for peace, unity, the OSCE commitment and the Helsinki Final Act, the European Security Order. And let's get united in 1 minute to remember Mr. Ilkka Kanerva. Please. And I am very pleased to start our formal plenary, to give the floor to 2 distinguished guests, but also our host for our annual session here in United Kingdom and in Birmingham. First, I will give the floor to the Speaker of the House of Commons, Sir Lindsay Hawley. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam President. On behalf of the UK Parliament, It's my privilege to warmly welcome you to the 29th annual session of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, and here in Birmingham as a preview for the Commonwealth Games. It is, of course, great to see everyone in person after so long. I'm honoured to be alongside Madam President of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, as well as Secretaries-Generals of the OSCE and the OSCE PA. I'm also grateful to have a representation of the UK Government, with Lord Ahmad of Wimbledon, Minister of State for South Asia and the Commonwealth. I will keep this short as I look forward to addressing you in more detail later this afternoon during the opening ceremony. However, I would just like to take a moment to recognise an emphasis on the importance of the work of the OSCE PA does, which is most clearly through Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky taking the time to speak to us this afternoon. So what I'd like to say is thank you to you, everyone who is attending today, and I look forward to engaging with you all throughout this conference. I will now hand over to Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And today we will have the honor to be joined online by the President of Ukraine, Mr. Volodymyr Zelensky. But I don't know exactly when because of the connection with Ukraine. So I will continue with the speakers list, but will return and give the floor to President of Ukraine, Mr. Volodymyr Zelensky, as soon as he is connected. And now I will continue with the opening plenary of the annual session for the 29th year. And once again, it's a pleasure to see all of you here. It's a high number of members who are here, and it shows the commitment and the importance of our work. But let me also, first of all, thank our host, who have put together an excellent program, an excellent place for us to be. I know that it hasn't been easy, but we are very grateful for everything you have done for our annual session. And we are grateful to the United Kingdom's Parliament and delegation, to the UK government and the people of Birmingham for their hospitality. On the agenda today, we have addresses by our host, Mr. John Whittingdale, head of the United Kingdom delegation, and Lord Ahmed of Wimbledon, Minister of State for South Asia and the Commonwealth, and the Prime Minister's Special Representative of Preventing Sexual Violence in Conflict. We have also, once again, we will be welcome Ms. Secretary General of the OSCE, Ms. Helga Maria Smith. So let's go further on the agenda. And it's my pleasure to give the floor to Mr. John Whittingdale, head of the UK delegation to the OSCE PA. The floor is yours, sir. Thank you.
Madam President, Mr. Speaker, Minister, friends and colleagues, it is my privilege to be able, as head of the UK delegation to OSCE PA, to welcome you to our annual assembly here in Birmingham. I should perhaps make a note of apology. Firstly, you would have been disappointed to arrive in Britain and not have it raining, but hopefully we'll get a break, but I know it was a bit wet this morning. I should also say I'm sorry some of you have had to struggle a bit to get here. I understand that the flights have not been easy, and in some cases, whilst you have made it your luggage has not. Hopefully that too will be solved soon. Amongst the welcomes you will receive, and we are genuinely thrilled that you have all been able to come to Birmingham, I would particularly draw attention to the welcome in your pack from His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, who was sorry not to be able to be with us, but is very firmly committed to the values and the purpose of our Assembly over the next few days. As you'll hear a number of times, Birmingham is the second city of the United Kingdom. As Mr. Speaker has already said, it is going to be hosting in just a few weeks' time our Commonwealth Games, bringing together countries from every part of the world to compete. You will see some of the attractions of Birmingham, I hope, over the next few days in the city, the Birmingham Library, the University, the Botanical Gardens, and wider than that, Birmingham is the birthplace of our Industrial Revolution. It is close by to where Shakespeare lived and worked, and my own particular cause close to my heart, it is the home of British heavy rock music. As you may know, the UK last hosted an annual assembly in 2004 in Edinburgh, and we meet this time at a critical time, and we are perhaps even more conscious than usual of the founding principles of the OSCE and the need to once again enforce them. I'm delighted to see so many delegates, but in particular, it is very good to see our friends from Ukraine in the Assembly this afternoon. I have visited Ukraine many times, but I have two visits which particularly stick in my mind because of recent events. 3 years ago, I walked through the streets of Mariupol, a beautiful port city, which is now rubble. And even more extraordinary and distressing, I observed the elections in 2019 on 3 occasions, President Zelensky's 2 rounds in which he won by an overwhelming majority, and also the parliamentary elections. And I saw the enthusiasm of Ukrainian citizens across the country for democracy and to their ability to cast their vote and choose who should be their government. Among the 3 observation missions that I was involved in, one of them with my friend Peter Osuski from Slovakia, who is here, we observed the electoral process in Busha. And it is hugely upsetting, therefore, to see what has subsequently happened in Busha. My government, as you will hear, stands with Ukraine. We are providing military support to the Ukrainian armed forces who are displaying extraordinary courage. We are supplying humanitarian aid to Ukraine. And we are also making available homes in Britain for a large number of refugees who have fled the fighting there. And my government also has imposed sanctions on Russians involved in the war. It's already been mentioned, and you will be aware, that the Russians have not sent a delegation or have not been able to send a delegation to this conference. The reason is that my government decided that those who voted in favor of the invasion of Ukraine in the Duma should be subject to sanctions, and therefore they have not been given visas. It is also the case that a large number of us are also sanctioned by Russia. I'm sanctioned by Russia. Mr. Speaker is sanctioned by Russia. At least 5 members of the UK delegation are. And therefore we felt that the decision that the Russians should not obtain visas was the correct one, and that applied also to the delegation from Belarus, who have clearly been vocal in their support of Russian aggression. My experience in Busha makes it particularly important to me that what has happened there, the people responsible should be held to account. And therefore, I'm very sad that it has proved necessary, but I am privileged to have been asked by Madam President to become the Special Rapporteur on the issue of war crimes. Sadly, the number grows daily, and we will undoubtedly hear more in the course of the next few days. But we see regularly the indiscriminate bombing of civilians, the killing of children, the rape of women, the deportation of families. And I'm a former Secretary of State in the British government for culture, media and sport, and therefore I'm also very conscious of the destruction of cultural property, which itself is a war crime, including the theatre at Mariupol. And as the Minister responsible for media, I am very conscious of the extraordinary courage being displayed by journalists across Ukraine and in Russia in bringing the truth of what is happening in those two countries. And I'm pleased that we will be having a side event on the safety of journalists later. There are, of course, other issues which we will want to discuss in the course of the next few days. But obviously, I suspect a lot of our time will be concentrated on Ukraine and what we as an organisation can do to demonstrate our solidarity and support for our Ukrainian friends. I would just like to finish by thanking my colleagues, both in the UK Secretariat and in the International Secretariat. A great deal of work has gone into preparing for this conference, and so I would like to thank them for all that they have done, and I would like to wish everybody here a very successful assembly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. John Whittingdale. Next speaker on my list is Lord Ahmed of Wimbledon, Minister of State for South Asia and the Commonwealth.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Madam President, Secretary General, Your Excellencies, Lords, Ladies and Gentlemen, welcome. Welcome to the United Kingdom and welcome to Birmingham. It's a great honour to be here together with Mr. Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, in welcoming you to both our country and, as has been said, our second city. In my introduction, it was said I'm also, amongst other things, Minister of State for the Commonwealth, and we're looking forward to welcoming, now there are 56 countries of the Commonwealth, for a real sporting event a few weeks from now. But it's a real honour to welcome you. John Whittingdale and I have known each other many, many years, and it was interesting hearing John say to talk about the British weather. Well, part of my title is a giveaway of where I live, which is Wimbledon, and some of you may have noticed there's a small tournament going on at the moment. I noticed the ambassador from Kazakhstan is here, who's a great avid tennis player, amongst others. Wimbledon without rain is a non-event, so therefore, for me, it was no surprise to see such weather here. But as the UK Minister with a wide range of responsibilities, it's a huge honour to also be the Minister responsible for the OSCE. And to John and the whole of the UK delegation, I pay tribute to them for their absolute devotion and dedication to the OSCE. And I thank them also for their insights and valuable insights they provide to me as the Minister responsible. I've seen myself, through working with the OSCE, its incredible work, from areas of military to transparency, to human rights, to democracy, and the environment. And indeed, the list goes on. But as I'm sure all of us realize, indeed, His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, in his letter to the OSCE, reflects on this very issue, that today the work and objectives of the OSCE are arguably, in fact, they are under greater threat than any other time in its history. And it's for all of us, irrespective of the role we play to stand up and defend them. And that is why I am absolutely delighted to have this opportunity, not only to welcome you to the United Kingdom, but to address you, colleagues from across Parliament, as to your role, which for all of us is extremely vital. Together, all countries, the United Kingdom, our allies across the world, have demonstrated strength and unity in our response to Mr. Putin's barbaric, premeditated invasion of a sovereign nation, the nation of Ukraine. For our part in the United Kingdom, as John has mentioned, whether it's diplomacy, humanitarian support, economic reconstruction, indeed the Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, will be attending the Lugano conference next week on this very objective, or indeed standing with Ukraine through support of its military. We stand with Ukraine. We continue to support Ukraine. We have colleagues from across different parties, different perspectives, here in the United Kingdom and other countries. But one thing I can say with absolute confidence about us from the United Kingdom, and I'm grateful to colleagues and shadow ministers from Her Majesty's opposition, that when it comes to the issue of Ukraine, we are absolutely at one. There is no difference, nor should there be. The United Kingdom stands firm in our support to Ukraine in its fight and have committed £1.3 billion in military aid and operational support, including support for weapons. Our economic and humanitarian support totals nearly £400 million. It includes food, medical supplies, and shelter kits. And as the United Kingdom's Minister for Sanctions, we are also ensuring that Mr. Putin's regime pays an economic price for its actions. And we have now sanctioned more than 1,000 individuals and over 100 entities. But it is important that when we look to act in this particular way, particularly when it comes to issue of sanctions, that we stand together with our allies and friends from across the world. But sanctions really hit hard when we work together as one. This unprovoked, illegal war is, of course, far more than an attack on Ukraine. It is also an attack on the very founding principles of the OSCE, the pillars on which European security is built. Russia appears to believe that these principles, designed to keep us all safe, principles all sides have agreed to, even during the Cold War, and yes, by Russia itself, are no longer in its interest. Simply put, this is a tragedy. Yet even as Russia flagrantly disregards commitments itself signed up to, including the Minsk Agreement, the OSCE, is still proving its value. Prior to the invasion, we drew heavily on its confidence-building measures in an effort together to avert this crisis. The United Kingdom strongly supported Ukraine in its use of the Vienna document, giving Russia the opportunity to explain its buildup of troops. Yet, tragically, every week since the invasion, notwithstanding the fact that we have gathered together at the table in Vienna, we wish to continue to hold Russia to account. But Russia is still continuing its assault on Ukraine. The United Kingdom has twice joined the majority of OSCE states in triggering the Moscow mechanism, launching missions to document the impacts of the invasion. As you know, the first report from April exposed the true face of Mr. Putin's war, revealing widespread human rights and humanitarian law violations by Russian troops. The credible evidence the independent experts found of war crimes, from torture and killing of innocent civilians, and as we meet today, Madam President, yet again in the last week, we have seen a shopping centre with innocent civilians attacked, and this morning, Again, we heard further assaults and heard news of credible attacks yet again on the port city and its surrounding areas around Odessa, attacking and seeking to instill further fear in the innocent civilians of Ukraine, trying to disable its lifelines. The report that the OSCE has conducted has also captured reports, all reports of independent authorities of the UN have captured accounts of devastating sexual violence, an issue close to my heart as the Prime Minister's Special Representative on preventing sexual violence in conflict. And we must work together to ensure that those perpetrators who commit these crimes, there is no impunity and they will be held to account. I had the occasion to visit Poland in recent months, and I pay tribute to the Polish government and many governments around Ukraine who are providing vital support. I met directly with those people, young women especially, in the majority of cases, the elderly, young children fleeing the war in Ukraine, and sitting down with them. And there were very, very many poignant moments, I'm sure, through our own reflections, we have insights of. But there was one particular incident where there was a young boy, as I went round one of the centers where Ukrainians were being housed and supported, who followed me around. He was the age of one of my own children. He was only 10. And he kept with us. I quite liked his resilience, despite the officials around you, he didn't give up. He smiled. We didn't speak the same language, but one thing I knew, that he was taken by the fact that there was someone, he didn't know who I was, visiting, but equally reflecting all the countries present here and beyond was the important issue, which he then said to me, that you being here meant you care. I didn't have anything to give him apart from smiles, and for a moment I remember I'm wearing a UK badge on my lapel, but as many of you see throughout Parliament, we wear with pride the flag of the United Kingdom and Ukraine. And I knelt down, I took off my lapel badge and gave it to him. Now this young child who'd lost everything didn't know what to do. He smiled, he took it gratefully, and he disappeared. And I thought for a moment, what does this mean? What does it translate? This young Ukrainian boy. 5 minutes later, he returned with a keyring. The keyring actually had the flag of Georgia on it. But through a translator, he said to me, it is Ukrainian tradition, it is Ukrainian hospitality, that if you are presented with a gift, you give a gift. I could not find something which had the British flag or the English flag, but the Georgian flag represented the closest thing to it. And that, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, captures the spirit of Ukraine, the children of Ukraine, the reason why we're standing up for Ukraine. And we should never lose sight of that vital, vital objective. In March, the United Kingdom led efforts to ensure those perpetrators are held to account. And we helped, together with other countries, to refer the situation to Ukraine to the International Criminal Court, which has now secured the support of 42 other countries. And I'm glad the ICC investigation under the ICC prosecutor Karim Khan is now underway. And again, the United Kingdom is playing its part to assist and work with all other internal and international investigations to ensure we can provide justice. We will also support efforts by the Ukrainian authorities to investigate war crimes, in particular conflict-related sexual violence. At tomorrow's session, you will hear how the UK is working with partners to ensure the evidence of Russia's crimes is documented, and documented in a way that ensures prosecution. This includes providing funding and law enforcement support to reinforce the ICC's investigation. And the United Kingdom has appointed an experienced and renowned judge, Sir Howard Morrison, as an independent advisor to the Ukrainian Prosecutor General. When she visited London, we were pleased not only to offer her technical support and support of experts, but also financial commitments to ensure that the prosecutions start taking place. What's most crucial to that is evidence. And it is important that we put the survivors' rights at the heart of our evidence gathering, ensuring that survivors have their experiences recorded safely and in a way that strengthens the pursuit of justice. It's an important way towards accountability. It's important towards healing. Our collective approach should be guided by the principles laid out in the Murad Code, the global code of conduct for collection of information from survivors of systematic and conflict-related sexual violence. I was proud and honored to accompany the brave Nadia Murad, herself a survivor of sexual violence from the despicable organization that is Daesh in Iraq, who is now amongst the most powerful advocates of this particular issue, and indeed recognized through the Nobel Prize. And together with her, in April, we launched at the UN Security Council the Murad Code, and we are deploying it. We immediately ensured it was translated into Ukrainian to help those survivors, those incredible, courageous survivors who are fleeing Russian onslaughts, to ensure that they're informed of their rights and that we can secure their testimonies in a way that allows for successful prosecutions. Let me also just add that the UK will be hosting an international conference in November in London on this very issue that will rally international support behind further action to tackle these abhorrent crimes. Ukraine, of course, will be integral to our thinking and planning. To conclude, Madam President, Mr. Speaker, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I share with all of you the revulsion, the unrelenting horror Russia is inflicting upon the Ukrainian people. It is the government of Russia. Russia itself is a country rich in history and tradition, and we must ensure also that the people of Russia, many brave Russian souls who have taken to the streets of Russia, also know that our fight is not with them. It is with the government, Mr. Putin's government, who has inflicted this war not just on Ukraine, but its impacts are now being felt across the world. I also share the fact that through attacking ports such as Odessa, we're now looking and we're seeing ourselves witnessing Russia's attempt to weaponize global hunger. And I'm sure I speak for everyone in this hall. Our support for Ukraine, and I say to our dear Ukrainian friends, who I had the great honor to meet a little earlier, we will not waver. We will not yield to those who complain of war fatigue, who agitate for an unfair and unsustainable negotiated settlement. We will stand in solidarity with you. We will stand in solidarity with Ukraine, and we will work with you in your efforts to push back Russia, to push back Mr. Putin's intent, through support militarily, through diplomatic isolation, sanctions, and indeed acting at the heart of Russian economy through its energy imports. Ukraine's victory, God willing, will be not just a victory for Ukraine. It will be a victory for democracy. It will be a victory for the integrity and sovereignty of every nation. It is a victory in all our interests, and we will be with you, however long it takes. There is much work to do ahead. Over the next 4 days, I know all of you will be debating and reaching important decisions on how this institution, set up to look at issues of conflict, avert conflict, to look at important issues of security across Europe, but ultimately to see how we can strengthen cooperation across Europe, will have deliberations and how it navigates this important and challenging path it currently confronts. But in this regard, I assure you, the United Kingdom is, has been, and will remain a steadfast partner. And I wish you well in this vital task, and we look forward to the outcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Thank you, Lord Ahmad of Wimbledon. And now we will take a short break of 5 minutes, no longer than 5 minutes. Please stay in the room, don't go out. Thank you.
Die wurden verloren, deswegen müssen wir jetzt mal neu. Die haben wohl Visitenkarten ausgetauscht, aber die Niederländer haben die Visitenkarte verloren, deswegen.
The Mongolia is planning to go to Sweden. August or September.
Yes.
Those member of parliament invited us.
Yes.
Our head of delegation is running for the vice president
Yes.
in this session.
Yes.
If you guys have a chance, okay, support.
Yeah, sure.
It's no problem.
Ya tamam, sıkıntı yok ya, varsa konuşuruz zaten. Konuşuruz.
Anıyormuş.
Order. Please take your seat. We will start our plenary session again. Dear colleagues, I have just been informed that Ukrainian President of Ukraine, Mr. Volodymyr Zelensky, most probably will not be able to join us this afternoon. But I promise you, if so, or if it will be another day, I will immediately give the floor to President Volodymyr Zelensky. I would also like to suggest, before we go further on the agenda, because this should have been, in my view, after the speech of President of Ukraine, an honor for the victims of Russia's war in Ukraine, for all those people who have not among us any longer, who are victims of the cruelty, who have died. Let's honor them with a silent minute. Thank you. Let's go on and back to the agenda. Next point on my agenda is address by the President of OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, Ms. Margareta Cederfelt. That's me. No, it's not possible to rise. No, thank you. Madam Secretary General Helga Smith, Mr. Secretary General Roberto Montella, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's a true pleasure to see so many delegates taking part in this year's annual session. After almost 2.5 years of non-physical meetings, I am very pleased to welcome you here in Birmingham, especially those of you who attend the annual session in person for the first time. Let me as well express my most sincere gratitude to the Parliament of the United Kingdom for hosting us, and to Mr. John Whittingdale, head of the UK delegation. I address you today having returned from Ukraine just a few days ago. We were a delegation from OSCE PA. It was me, it was Vice President Reinhold Lopatka, the chair of the second committee, Mr. Jean-Pierre Pons, Ms. Kari Henriksen, and Secretary General Montella. We went to Ukraine in solidarity with the people of Ukraine. We went to Bucha and Irpin. We saw desolation of peaceful cities. Apartment blocks and houses turned to dust. Hospital turned to rubble. Civilians murdered. Women and children raped. As war rags on throughout Ukraine, many more innocent people will be killed. The recent attack on Kremenchuk and Odessa clearly demonstrate the point. To our dear friends in the Ukrainian delegation, my message is clear. We stand with you. We will continue to defend your right to live in your country with its international agreed border, to live your life in peace and independence. With full respect for the decision of our host in the spirit of our assembly, I would rather have engaged our Russian members in our debate to show our clear opposition to the war of aggression in Ukraine. Although they are not here today, but I hope they will listen to us. The OSCE PA's position has been clear since 2014. We have denounced the illegal annexation of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol since the beginning of the military confrontation in the eastern Ukraine. We have consistently urged the resolution of the conflict through the full and good faith implementation of the Minsk Agreement. Before that, we had also been frank in our condemnation of the illegal occupation by the Russian Federation of the Georgian regions of Abkhazia and Khinkin Valley. At the same time, we have always kept open a door for dialogue. Despite this violation of the Helsinki Final Act, we have looked for common ground to respond to joint challenges. But we cannot sweep our values under the rug. The OSCE Parliamentary Assembly was not established to ignore gross violation on our shared principles and just carry on with business as usual. We are not here to only exchange friendly statements and refrain from addressing issues on delegations or another would want to brush aside. This is especially true today in the face of the most brazen attack on European security since the Second World War. As a matter of fact, in the span of just 4 months, the Russian Federation has violated every single one of the 10 Helsinki principles. Let me mention them. First, Russia denies Ukraine's sovereignty. Second, Russia uses forces against Ukraine. Thirdly, Russia has assaulted Ukraine's frontiers. 4, since 2014, Russia has undermined Ukraine's territorial integrity. 5, Russia has walked away from peaceful mediation. 6, Russia has violated the principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of Ukraine. 7, atrocities paint a clear picture of Russia's contempt for the human rights and fundamental freedoms of the people of Ukraine. 8, Russia has denied the most basic rights to those under occupation. 9, Russia has sabotaged international cooperation. 10, and Russia continues to ignore all its obligations under international law. These facts are not up for debate, but many questions remain. What can we do as Parliamentary Assembly to hold the Russian Federation accountable? and support a sustainable solution to the war in agreement with Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty? How can the OSCE PA continue to support Ukraine? And as we move towards the 50th anniversary of the Helsinki Final Act, what impact will this massive violation have on the future of the OSCE? I look forward to hearing what Madam Secretary General Smith and Chairman in Office Foreign Minister Mr. Rao think about the current situation during this annual session. Dear members, today, perhaps more than ever since the signing of the Helsinki Final Act, we need to fully play our role as the OSCE democratic backbone. OSCE PA must continue to fully support the invisible but crucial work that the OSCE carries out every single day. In our long quest for peace and stability, we all benefit from the OSCE comprehensive concept of security. While continuing to denounce the terrible act of the war of the Russian Federation, we must not forget about the other crucial tasks we carry out in OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. To perform election observations, to support democratic development in the OSCE region is one important task. But we do also have to put pressure on our governments to fulfill and strengthen the OSCE commitments, to continue our work for the OSCE values and commitments back home in our national parliament, in our constituency, to support peace, stability, democracy. But importantly, to use the tools we have available to support stability and peace in the OSCE region. We must continue and over to safeguard our international order based on shared rules, shared principles, and shared commitments as stated in the Helsinki Final Act and the Paris Charter. We are here in Birmingham to reaffirm these values and to reinforce international cooperation. We must also continue to generate ideas, to share experience, and to find solutions to the multitude of security challenges we face. Over the next 5 days, we will have ample opportunity to discuss the war in Ukraine, as well as the multitude of challenges facing the OSCE region. I look forward to vigorous debates and honest exchange of views and experience. Together, we will produce the first PA declarations since 2019. In doing so, let's keep in mind the demand and expectations of the citizens we represent. But also, I am returning to Ukraine. When we took the train to Ukraine from Poland, there was a long line of people, of Ukrainians, lining up because they said they want to go home, to defend their country, to defend their rights. And for me, it shows that our work are important, not only in word, but what we do to support Ukraine, to support their questions about sending weapons, sending ammunition, sending humanitarian aid, and to remember them and raise their issues. Let's continue to do that. Let's continue with our political work. Dear colleagues, in closing, let me once again thank our British host and the International Secretariat. for bringing us together today and for the coming days. I wish us all a fruitful exchange and a pleasant stay in Birmingham. Thank you very much. Thank you. And now I will invite Madam Secretary General Helga Smith to deliver her address. Thank you.
Madam President, Secretary General Montella, esteemed members of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, ladies and gentlemen, I really welcome the opportunity to join you here in Birmingham today for the 2022 annual session of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. And let me start by saying that I have tremendous respect for the work that you do every day as parliamentarians. This work has always been important for us, for the organization, in terms of helping us advancing security and cooperation. But it's particularly important today, because hanging over this year's session is the grim reality of war waged by one participating state against another. The consequences for the people of Ukraine are severe. Its families losing loved ones and torn apart. Over 6 million people still internally displaced. Costs of reconstruction spiraling into the hundreds of billions. The implications for the region and beyond are significant, with huge flows of refugees needing care and rocketing food prices as grain is at risk of rotting in silos. And the civilian suffering induced by this unprovoked violence is profound, from Kremenchuk to Bucha, Irpin, Mariupol, and so many other cities. It did not have to be like this. So many were working to support discussion and address security concerns, bilaterally, via the Strategic Stability Dialogue with the US, via NATO, and via the OSCE. We should really remember that on the 8th of February, the Polish chairman in office launched the renewed European Security Dialogue, which was meant to help build trust, transparency, and cooperation, and indeed to address security concerns. This was a real effort to try and prevent the biggest war in Europe after World War II. We repeatedly urged de-escalation and we warned of the consequences. But Russia chose force over dialogue and over cooperation. Russia continues to choose force, and this is a threat to all of us, and accountability will be key. The core principles that we agreed to unite around in Helsinki nearly 50 years ago remain vital to our common security. And though these principles are currently being trampled on with the war being waged against Ukraine, we are resolved. Resolved in our belief that the Helsinki Decalogue remains the essential foundation for peace and security in the OSCE region. Resolved in our support to Ukraine as it defends the freedom and democracy that we all hold so dear, and resolved in our commitment to continue providing the practical support to participating states that the OSCE delivers every day. The OSCE has partnered with the government of people of Ukraine for more than 25 years to strengthen security and support its reforms. Much of this support has been provided through the project coordinator in Ukraine. However, as of yesterday, our project coordinator of Ukraine had to stop all mandated activities. They are in the process of closing the mission because there was no consensus on renewing the mandate due to Russia's position. This follows the forced closure of our special monitoring mission to Ukraine in March, again because Russia refused to extend its mandate. This mission had been the impartial ears and eyes of the international community in Ukraine, monitoring the ceasefire and facilitating windows of silence that allowed for essential infrastructure repairs, benefiting millions each year. But the end of our two field operations in Ukraine is not what most participating states wanted, and it is not what Ukraine wanted. But let me assure you that this is not the end of our support to Ukraine. Our trusted relationships with the government and civil society, our experience with conflict environments, and our diverse expertise can continue to bolster the country's resilience and support the women, men, and children of Ukraine today and into the future. We can and we will help Ukraine to assess and address a range of physical and environmental risks, including in the Chernobyl exclusion zone. We can and we will build Ukraine's humanitarian demining capacity, ever more crucial in the current context where roads, parks, and playgrounds are littered with mines. And we can and will continue to combat human trafficking in Ukraine, also in transit countries and in destination countries. Our Special Representative and Coordinator for Countering Trafficking in Human Beings, Val Ritchie, is here with us today, and I know he will go into more depth on this vital work. The Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights is helping to monitor human rights violations in Ukraine and provides training to human rights defenders so that they can conduct their work as safely and as effectively as possible. Their director, Matteo Macacci, was in Ukraine this week. I could go on, but the key point is that the OSCE is uniquely placed to provide practical support to Ukraine in a range of areas, and that we will continue to do so. And I urge you, as those who hold influence over decisions and financing in your capitals, to keep the added value of the OSCE in focus as you consider the myriad ways in which your country is supporting Ukraine. We have a proud legacy to uphold and build upon. In addition to the support we provide in Ukraine, there's a great deal more that the OSCE is doing every day to shore up security and stability across our region. And this is vital, because the threats we face are many. The Taliban takeover in Afghanistan last year has been devastating for the people of that country, but is also a destabilizing factor for the region. The OSCE, notably our excellent field missions in Central Asia, are mitigating cross-border risks emanating from Afghanistan, subsequent societal vulnerabilities, as well as efforts to pursue new opportunities for connectivity and development in our region. Last month, I was in Tajikistan providing new equipment for their border service. We trained them to build capacities to help intercept illicit flows of drugs, weapons, and people along their 1,400-kilometer border along with Afghanistan. Supporting Central Asia with such initiatives will remain a focus for the year ahead. Across our mandates, we are confronted with technologies that can improve our lives, but also be used to manipulate, to damage, or to destroy. Take the despicable increase on online sexual exploitation, which has proven a lucrative business model for organized crime and trafficking groups targeting the most vulnerable. We have developed recommendations for governments looking specifically at preventing online trafficking. We have also developed pertinent guidance to combat trafficking of vulnerable people, including refugees. The wider challenge remains tackling impunity. There is just one conviction for every 2,000 human trafficking cases. Environmental issues were referred to already. Climate security is somewhere I see an enhanced role for the OSCE in the year ahead. The security implications of our changing climate are increasingly understood and require urgent action to mitigate. This was called for by ministers in Stockholm last year. We have undertaken an analysis to identify climate hotspots across the OSCE, many of which are transboundary, and they require regional cooperation between states to address them. and we are rolling out tailored measures in response, like our work on wildfire management in the South Caucasus. Gender inequality contributes to instability and robs our societies of the talent and know-how of at least half of the people of the world. And I'm proud that the number of women and youth beneficiaries is increasing across our projects. I'm proud of the work we do with women's resource centers to prevent and support the many victims of gender-based violence. And I'm proud that the OSCE is championing the role of women leaders, peace builders and mediators. It is statistically proven that peace agreements last longer and that societies are more prosperous with more women at the table and part of decision-making. This is all in addition to our work to unresolved conflicts and disputes. And while some of them have been disrupted, these mechanisms remain critical and valuable. And let me also use this to pay tribute to the great work our field missions do, whether in Southeast Europe, Moldova or Central Asia. Work not only at the regional or national level, but also at the local level, which is key for peace building and which is key also for reconciliation. We work closely with other organizations, notably the UN and its agencies. And we are comprehensive in our mandate. No regional organization covers so much ground. And you as parliamentarians have a pivotal role to play in helping us ensure that these efforts are successful. And finally, and this is really a message to all those who would say or would question the value of this organization, also in light of the war against Ukraine. Let me highlight two key truths here. The first truth is that the OSCE delivers real improvements in security and stability every day through our field missions, through our institutions, through the Secretariat and through the joint work we do together with the Parliamentary Assembly. These activities support our participating states and the people their governments serve. And more crucially, the second truth that must be kept in view is that on the 24th of February, Russia chose force over dialogue and cooperation. Russia alone is accountable for this choice. Our current predicament is a symptom of Russian malign intent. It's not the OSCE's inefficiency. I look forward to working with you to uphold the OSCE's principles, continue our support to Ukraine, and keep providing the practical, beneficial support to participating states that the OSCE delivers each and every day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Helga Maria Smith, OSCE Secretary General. Now I will open the floor for questions to Secretary General. I currently have one member who have requested to take the floor to ask questions. But we do not have any more time for this agenda item. But members may still put their questions to the chairperson in office in written form according to Rule 42.4 of our Rules of Procedure. And now I will give the floor to Ms. Marka Bochorisvili from Georgia. The floor is yours, Madam.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam Secretary General, more than 4 months already face another blatant violation of international law, including international humanitarian law and principles of UN Charter and the Helsinki Final Act by Russian Federation. More than 4 months already, Russia has been waging unprovoked, unjustified military aggression against Ukraine, which creates unprecedented humanitarian and security crisis in Europe since World War II. Aggression against Ukraine is a continuation of the same pattern Russia has started in Georgia, resulting in ongoing occupation of Georgia's two regions, Abkhazia and Tskhinvali. Therefore, we Georgians know well bitter taste of Russia's aggression and occupation and stand in strong solidarity with our Ukrainian friends. Russia bears full responsibility for its brutal actions. With this in mind, it is important to use all tools and mechanisms, including those the OSCE is disposal. My question is about Georgia. As conflict with Russia is not settled, occupation continues, and Russian military presence is still there on the ground. We have only international format, Geneva International Discussions since 2008, where we discuss Russia-Georgia conflict. Although we can't count that many successes achieved within this format in terms of conflict settlement, but it is still very important to keep Russia-Georgia conflict high in the international agenda, as there is no substantial peace without, sustainable peace without settling the conflict. How would you see, and do you see prospects of Geneva international discussions with participation of Russia and international partners, and what are the other mechanisms that could be used to address the continuous occupation of Georgian regions by Russia? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Marka Bochorisvili. Now I give the floor to Secretary General Maria Helga Smith. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the question. As I was referring to in my address is that the work this organization is doing to help and resolve the unresolved conflicts and disputes that exist in our region is absolutely critical. The OSCE plays a critical role. The OSCE plays a critical role in particular in facilitating the incident prevention and response mechanism in Anyeti. I had myself the honor to be present at the 100th anniversary last year. I was at the, I remember very well when I worked in the European Union, the mechanism was established back in 2008, and it was meant in the first place to provide humanitarian support. It was a mechanism really to help and facilitate the very important humanitarian issues affecting people on the ground. And it's very, very important that this mechanism continues, and it continues. You mentioned the Geneva International Discussions. I think it's very important also to continue to use this format. The discussions are ongoing, and I think it's critical that this important work continues. Like the work in other contexts continues. For example, our mission in Moldova is supporting the continued context in the Transnistrian settlement process with both sides. Very important because, as always, these mechanisms benefit the life of people on the ground. And yes, some of the mechanisms have been disrupted, but I think the modalities are being discussed to make sure that the mechanisms can continue to provide benefits to the people on the ground. Because as in every conflict, it's people that suffer, and I think it's our obligation to make sure that we do our utmost to help and alleviate people's suffering, particularly in conflict-affected areas.
Thank you, Madam Secretary General. And now, I would like, dear colleagues, to take a very short break before we proceed with consideration of supplementary items. But please stay in the room. It's just a few minutes. Don't leave. Thank you. Call for order. Let's start our session again. Dear delegates, please take your seat. Number 4 on the agenda, consideration of supplementary items. Before we move on with our next point on the agenda, I would like to announce that Mr. John Whittingdale, head of the UK delegation, will chair the drafting committee which will prepare the Birmingham Declaration. And we will now proceed with the consideration of the compromise supplementary item on the Russian Federation's war of aggression against Ukraine and its people and its threat to security across the OSCE region. Co-sponsored by Ms. Vilja Alkenate Abramekiene from Lithuania, Mr. Mukita Potorayev, Ukraine, and Vice President Senator Roger Wicker from US. I will give the floor to Vice President Senator Roger Wicker to present this compromise supplementary item. Vice President Roger Wicker, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and let me say at the outset how great it is to be back together as a full parliamentary assembly. This is wonderful and a great opportunity for us and our delegation from the United States. We all know that Russia has waged a brutal war of aggression and genocide against Ukraine and has committed horrific atrocities in the process. We'll hear more about this during this debate. This resolution is a compromise between the heads of the Lithuanian and Ukrainian delegations and in consultation with me as the OSCE Vice President who was asked to lead the, entrusted with this task of leading this resolution. I want to thank my Lithuanian and Ukrainian colleagues, Vilja Aleknante Abramekiene and Mr. Mikita Potorayev, for understanding the need to have a text that can gain the widest possible support, and I believe we have it before us. There have been 70 parliamentarians who have co-sponsored one or more parts of the 3 texts this compromise was based on, and this already shows overwhelming support. Although the draft is worthy of adoption at this point, there are some amendments that would strengthen it further. We will have yes or no votes on stronger language, but the overall support for the resolution, I think, will still be very, very strong. Let me say this. It gives me no pleasure to speak out against a fellow delegation, a fellow member nation of the OSCE. But we need to tell the truth here, and the truth is that Vladimir Putin has long been directly responsible for war crimes, for genocide, for tens of thousands of civilian deaths. In Grozny, in Aleppo, in countries he's invaded and occupied, Moldova, in Georgia in 2008, in Crimea, the Donbass, the Luhansk in 2014. If Mr. Putin succeeds in this war, does anyone believe his crimes and atrocities will end there? We will see him again if he's allowed to succeed. This war is the best chance we have ever had to defeat Vladimir Putin, to end his aggression once and for all. This war will probably not end soon. Let us resolve not to give in to war fatigue. This war will be expensive. Let us weigh the future costs if Russia succeeds. Ukraine must win this war. and we should give them our full support. This, my colleagues, is a time to be bold. There's too much at stake. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Vice President Senator Roger Wicker. Next, I will now open the debate of the compromise supplementary item. And I call as first speaker Mr. Willem Junila, head of the Finnish delegation. He will be followed by Vice President and head of the Cypriot delegation, Ms. Irene Charalambidis. For the moment, there is no time limit for the speeches, but if we got out of time, short of time, I will put in the time limit. Now, I give the floor to Mr. Willem Junila. The floor is yours, sir. Mr. Willem Junila, head of the Finnish delegation, the floor is yours, sir. Thank you. Now, I will go further on the speakers list. Next speaker is Ms. Irene Charalambidis, Vice President of OSCE PA and head of the Cypriotic delegation.
Madam.
She will be followed by head of the Georgian delegation, Mr. Nikolaos Samkaratse. Ms. Irene Charalambidis, the floor is yours. Thank you. No, she is not here yet. Next speaker on my list is Mr. Nikolaos Samkaratse, head of the Georgian delegation. He will be followed by the head of the Netherlands delegation, Ms. Farah Karimi. Mr. Nikolaos Samkaratse, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. We, of course, support the proposed amendment on Russian Federation's war of aggression against Ukraine. We, Georgians, are the first victims of Russian aggression, and we all know well the pattern of behavior of Russian Federation against its neighbors and against the countries who choose to be independent and follow their own path of development. Unfortunately, the tragic war that is waged by Russia in Ukraine has brought destruction, deaths of many innocent citizens, and occupation of almost 20% of the Ukrainian territory, which again, if we look at the scenario in Georgia, is pretty much the same. The Russians have also occupied 20% of the Georgian territory. Now they have occupied around 20% of the Ukrainian territory. And even though the whole world and international community stands in solidarity with Ukraine, we think that there are also, the words and declarations are very important. Support with weapons is also important. Keeping diplomatic pressure against Russia is important. But what we need to take into account is that this is a new type of war. It's a struggle, life and death struggle for Ukraine, and not only Ukraine, but also for the whole region. And therefore, the Western world, we believe, and in this regard, I mean NATO and the European Union, have to take also brave steps about incorporating countries like Ukraine, countries like Georgia and Moldova in its own ranks, because there will be no more gray zones in the future, and either these countries are parts of the Western society and Western integration projects, or they will be swallowed by the Russian Empire. So this is something that we need to seriously take into account. And of course, Georgian delegation supports this, this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nicholas Samkaratsa. Next speaker on my list is Ms. Farah Karimi, head of the Netherlands delegation. She will be followed by Mr. Willem Junila, head of the Finnish delegation. Ms. Farah Karimi, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Madam President, thank you very much. To start, we support, of course, the resolution, and we co-sponsored it. It is with great respect that we are witnessing the resistance of Ukrainian people against a war of aggression by Russian Federation. The war against Ukraine by Russia is a clear violation of international law, a clear violation of sovereignty and the territorial integrity of Ukraine. It is a clear violation of OSCE principles and Helsinki Final Act 2. It is a great pleasure to see our dear colleagues from Ukrainian delegation present here amongst us. Despite bombs and rockets falling in almost all Ukrainian cities, despite war crimes and unspeakable atrocities against Ukrainian people, Ukrainian Parliament continues to meet and to act upon its responsibilities. In times of huge challenges for democratic countries and societies by autocratic leaders and populist and extremist forces around the world, we salute Ukrainian parliamentarians for their courage. Our solidarity with and support to Ukrainian people in many different ways, like welcoming Ukrainian refugees, offering humanitarian aid, providing necessary weapons and military support for justified self-defense, and last but not least, political support, like for candidacy of Ukraine to EU, will continue. There is a responsibility, a huge responsibility for, and listening to Secretary General Helga Schmidt, a huge challenge to OSCE to deliver on its promises of providing security in Europe through cooperation, conflict prevention, and dialogue. Nonetheless, OSCE and all its participating states must do everything possible to find ways and approaches to bring an end to this devastating war with enormous humanitarian consequences for people, mostly vulnerable people around the world. At the end, no support to Ukrainian people is stronger than doing everything to end the war. Even in these times that a dialogue seems impossible, we can't give up on the core value of OSCE to find ways for dialogues at all levels. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Farah Karimi. Next speaker on my list is Mr. Willem Junila, head of the Finnish delegation. He will be followed by Mr. Mark Pritchard, deputy head of the United Kingdom delegation. Mr. Willem Junila, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Madam President, dear colleagues, I wish to commend Ms. Vilja Apramikiene of Lithuania, Mr. Mikita Poturayev of Ukraine, and Mr. Roger Wicker of the United States for their successful mediation efforts, which have resulted in this compromise resolution. We all know that the Russian Federation has broken most of the rules and principles this organization was built on. The Russian Federation has clearly violated the principles of the Helsinki Final Act. Point 3 of this resolution states that the principles the Russian Federation has broken in an open and unashamed manner include refraining from the threat or use of force, respecting territorial integrity of states, equal rights, and self-determination of peoples. It is unfortunate that the Russian Federation does not want to bear any kind of responsibility for its continued aggression and violation of the most basic human rights. Instead, its leaders are blaming others for causing damage with measures which have been taken in response to their own aggression. It is completely unacceptable that the Russian Federation keeps on questioning the independence of Ukraine and their right to sovereignty. It is a huge challenge for the world to have an invader that is living in an era the rest of us have long ago moved on from. There's been a discussion about sustaining the OSCE as a platform for dialogue between every participating state and at all times. While I understand this viewpoint, I must ask, is there any limit? Is there any kind of ramification at all for a participating state or two for breaking the principles we share and respect? Why should we continue to look the other way? Why should we continue to seek mutual understanding when all they seem to expect is for us to turn the other cheek? Participating states should not only support Ukraine, but also defend the values we share. Sympathizing with the aggressor in any way risk hollowing out these values and principles. Diplomatic efforts cannot be constructive until the Russian Federation ceases its offensive. This is the least they can and must do at this point. These violations are not only a direct threat to the unity and territorial integrity of Ukraine and other neighboring states, but also a common threat to the security of all other OSCE participating states. We must understand this and act accordingly. We should support the authorities and citizens of Ukraine in defending themselves and their territory within its internationally recognized borders. We can no longer drag a step or two behind. Ukraine needs more than a few claps of hands. We must support them more efficiently. There is no other way. Our host country, the United Kingdom, has taken a determined approach to this. It's an example we should follow. We need to make sure we hasten our pace to make sure that Ukraine prevails and that the cost of the Russian aggression becomes so unbearable that common sense will eventually be found from the depths of Kremlin. We should resolutely condemn the violation of the Helsinki Principles as well as fundamental principles of international law by the government of the Russian Federation in its war of aggression against Ukraine. Dear colleagues, I strongly recommend all participating states to support this proposal and proposed amendments that strengthen its message.
Thank you, Mr. Willem Junila. Next speaker on my list is Mr. Mark Pritchard, Deputy Head of the United Kingdom Delegation. He will be followed by Mr. Joan Pierre-Pons, Head of the Spanish Delegation and Chair of the Second Committee. Mr. Mark Pritchard, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President, and can I thank my colleagues from Lithuania, Ukraine and the United States for tabling this important supplementary item to which I speak in support. And this Assembly meets at a critical time for the peace of Europe, for wider Europe, and indeed the stability of African nations and many countries in the Middle East. Russia's illegal and brutal invasion of Ukraine not only threatens the physical security, political stability and economic prosperity of OSCE member states, but many other countries beyond Europe and NATO's borders, and also OSCE observer nations, many represented here today. For Russia's aggression against Ukraine is an assault on all who believe in freedom and democracy. And unless Putin fails in Ukraine, as ably set out by my friend and colleague Senator Wicker, the pain and suffering is only going to get spread and likely to get much worse, causing an unprecedented humanitarian and migration disaster, much worse than the current crisis we see unfolding. In blockading Ukraine's grain, exports. Putin is using food as a weapon of war. Now, of course, NATO, currently Ukraine is not NATO's border. Ukraine is not the EU's border. But I would suggest it is freedom's border. And that is why this Assembly, this organization, and its member states need to do everything we can to give Ukraine the tools to finish the job. Madam President, this is a time to stand together, united for freedom, democracy, human rights, and the international rule of law, for our shared values. And these are not Western values, they're not NATO's values, they're not the EU's values, but they are international values, to show strength and leadership, and to make a stand for our shared peace, physical security, economic security, and work to strengthen global alliances, partnerships, and friendships. And to match the courage and valiance of the Ukrainian people with the same political and diplomatic courage and valiance of OSCE member states and of this Assembly. Now, of course, many said that Russian bombs would never fall on Kyiv, but sadly they are. So let us not, Madam President, say that Russian bombs will never fall on Chisinau, Tallinn, Vilnius, Riga, Helsinki, or Stockholm, or elsewhere. Let us not just hope and pray, but in addition to hoping and praying, stand resolute together to ensure that such events never happen. But this will only happen with deeds, not just words, to paraphrase Winston Churchill, a freeman of this city. We have to match our words with actions. If we don't, the pain and the suffering will increase, it will spread, and we will regret our inaction. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mark Pritchard. Next speaker is Mr. Jean-Pierre Pons, chair of the second committee and head of the Spanish delegation. He will be followed by head of the US delegation, Mr. Steve Cohen. Mr. Jean-Pierre Pons, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. President. I'm going to shift to Spanish, sorry. En primer lugar, Presidenta, muchas gracias por haber podido participar en la delegación que estuvo en Ucrania esta semana, agradecérselo personalmente. Y en segundo lugar, creo que en esta sala todos los miembros que forman parte coincidirán en que tenemos una condena unánime de la agresión que se ha producido en estos meses hacia un país como Ucrania, y querría empezar recordando que el jefe de la delegación ucraniana en febrero ya nos recordó que tal vez no volvería a ver a sus compañeros de esta organización, y por tanto me ha alegrado muchísimo volverlo a ver y volverle a ver a la entera delegación. En primer lugar, también querría decir en nombre de toda la delegación española que hay que recordar siempre a las víctimas, y los grandes perdedores de esta guerra son las poblaciones civiles, los niños, las mujeres, y también todo lo que se deriva a través de la crisis de refugiados, los IDPs, los desplazados internos, y también la problemática que se está generando a través de trata, y sobre todo de la trata de mujeres, de niños y niñas, que es uno de los temas que tenemos que poner encima de la mesa también cuando hablamos de seguridad. Me gustaría también decir que lo que está en riesgo es las democracias. Yo creo que como parlamentarios de esta asamblea, que es una asamblea parlamentaria, hace unas semanas estuve en Atenas como miembro del segundo comité, como chair, en el que mientras subías a la Acrópolis veías una exposición de la Embajada de Ucrania en Atenas, viendo las bombas mientras subías hacia la cuna de la democracia. Por lo tanto, recordar y reiterar que el drama que está en juego hoy es nuestras democracias, nuestros valores existenciales. Por eso, ante eso, yo querría decir también algo optimista hoy, ¿no? Y es que en estos últimos días hemos visto que hay una agenda política común ante esa agresión, con la reunión del G7 en Alemania, una visión unida de ese grupo. Ha habido la adhesión, la candidatura a la Unión Europea de Moldavia y de Ucrania, que creo que hemos de celebrar, y por supuesto la cumbre en mi país, en España, en Madrid, de la OTAN, con adhesiones como la de Finlandia y Suecia. Y por tanto eso demuestra que hay una agenda política común, pero sobre todo hay una amenaza que creo que todos tenemos claro. Y de esa visita a Ucrania lo que más percibimos es que esa amenaza refleja que los ucranianos están defendiendo su país, pero sobre todo están defendiéndonos a todos y a nuestras democracias. Por lo tanto, creo que es importante recordarlo. Me gustaría también recordar que estamos en un momento de inflación y de crecimiento, de nuevo orden mundial, y no hay nada peor para la igualdad de las personas que la inflación. Es un indicador claro de la desigualdad. Y querría terminar también en el Standing Committee de esta mañana. Ha hablado la presidenta Zederfeld y el secretario general Montela sobre el rol de la OSCE, sobre la visibilidad, sobre el trabajo en el terreno, lo ha dicho también la secretaria general. Y yo querría terminar recordando que incluso en los peores momentos, y voy a citar a Mario Draghi el 26 de junio del 2012, en la peor de las crisis que ha vivido Europa a nivel financiero antes de esta guerra, decía que whatever it takes, hemos de hacer todo lo que sea necesario y, por tanto, es necesario también pensar en vías de diálogo, en vías de reflexión, de poder hablar con todos, incluso con Rusia, condenando absolutamente lo que está sucediendo en Ucrania. Muchísimas gracias y, por supuesto, vamos a dar apoyo a este punto. Gracias.
Thank you, Mr. John Per Pons. Next speaker on my list is head of the U.S. delegation, Mr. Steve Cohen. He will be followed by Vice President Pia Kauma from Finland. Mr. Steve Cohen, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate the recognition. And this compromise proposal, which has been brought by our country, the United States, as well as two countries that I admire greatly, Lithuania, the home where my grandfather was born, and my great-grandfather and others, and Ukraine, which we've all come to love and admire for their courage, their fight for freedom, and their fight for freedom on our behalf. This resolution will pass, needs to pass. As I waited to speak, I thought about a former United States congressman named Mo Udall. Mo Udall said, "Everything has been said, but not by everybody." Oftentimes, that's the case and necessary to slow down discussion. But in this case, it's not, because it's important that everybody who wants to goes on record of voicing their nation's concern about what has happened in Ukraine and what has happened because of the Federation of Russia. This is so devastating. There's hardly a day that one can watch television and not come to tears at what Putin and his government have done to the Ukrainian people. Killing women and children and disabled, killing soldiers, killing men, they count too, but killing anybody that's in his way of what he thinks is his historical path to lying next to Lenin in Moscow. He'll get there, but he'll get there only after he's killed tens and thousands of more people and destroyed more cities and destroyed people's hopes and wishes for a family and a future that can grow and prosper as years go on. So I join in support of the resolution, appreciate everybody's support. Nothing has brought this group together more, the EU together more, people all over the world. And the people that are members of BRICS, the Brazilians, the Indians, the South Africans, the Chinese, they need to be here too. And so do the Russian people. And there are fine Russian people. I have been to Moscow, I have been to St. Petersburg, I have been to Belarus as well in Minsk and met really wonderful people yearning for freedom. But their leaders stink, and they're causing the biggest stink this world has smelled since Germany. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Steve Cohen. Next speaker on my list is Vice President Pia Kauma from Finland. She will be followed by Mr. Joe Wilson from United States of America. Ms. Pia Kauma, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Madam President, dear colleagues, I of course support this supplementary item. Russia's illegal war of aggression against Ukraine will be at the front and center of our discussions here in Birmingham, and it needs to remain our primary focus as long as the war rages on. Turning away is not an option. The Russian aggression against Ukraine has already had far-reaching consequences. The war has shaken the foundations of the European security order. It has led to further deterioration of food security in areas where people are already struggling to find enough food. In the global economy, slower growth and higher inflation can be expected and are already there. The most acute and painful implications are, however, felt by Ukrainians. They are faced with the horrors of the war every day. What makes this war particularly brutal is not only the scope of violence, but the scope of violence against civilians. Civilians have been trapped in towns and cities under heavy shelling. Enforced disappearances and widespread use of sexual violence as a weapon of war have caused immense suffering and deep trauma. Direly needed assistance has not reached those in need, as its safe delivery could not be guaranteed. There are also reports of Russia consciously targeting hospitals, schools and other civilian infrastructure, most lately a shopping center in Kremenchuk. Directly and intentionally attacking civilian and civilian targets is a war crime. OSCE and other international organizations must show that brazen violations of international and humanitarian law do not go without consequences. Therefore, international efforts to investigate war crimes deserve our full support. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Madam Vice President Pia Kauma. Next speaker on my list is Mr. Joe Wilson from US. He will be followed by Ms. Christina Michaud from Canada. Mr. Joe Wilson, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President and fellow delegates. Every year that this body has met since the war criminal Putin's illegal occupation of Crimea and incursion into the Donbass, there has been exposure to the atrocities of Putin's war against the people of Ukraine. But this year, the inhumanity is shocking. Putin's war in Europe, with crimes against humanity on a massive scale, where Putin is sacrificing the lives of young Russians for his money, oil, and power. I am grateful that the United States is a co-sponsor of this resolution, which lays out the violations of the Helsinki Final Act and the criminal behaviors of the Putin military and government, particularly those of Putin and Lukashenko against the Ukrainian people with threats to Moldova, Georgia, and the Baltic republics. We see this resolution as an affirmation of support for Ukraine and a statement for the record of the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe does not subscribe to the bizarre lies of the Kremlin and refuses to be silent on the mass murderers that are now being conducted in Europe against a sovereign nation. We know that one day Ukraine will be victorious. Those responsible in Russia and Belarus will be held to account. People of decency must continue united as a body, as countries, as individuals, for victory in Ukraine, for all democracies, whatever it takes. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Joe Wilson. Next speaker on my list is Ms. Christina Michaud from Canada. She will be followed by Mr. Ahmed Arslan from Turkey. Ms. Christina Michaud, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Merci. En tant que députée du Québec à la Chambre des communes du Canada, je suis fière de donner mon appui à la résolution du compromis sur l'agression russe contre l'Ukraine. Non provoquée, illégale et brutale, la guerre d'agression menée par la Russie contre l'Ukraine avec l'aide du Bélarus viole le droit international, en plus d'être un affront aux principes qui sont ceux de l'OSCE. Au début de l'année, le président Zelensky s'est adressé directement aux parlementaires de la Chambre des communes. Lors de son intervention, il nous a demandé d'imaginer un scénario en vertu duquel nos quartiers, nos édifices et nos communautés seraient bombardés, comme c'est le cas en Ukraine. Il nous a également prié de songer aux réponses que nous donnerions à nos enfants qui demanderaient que nous leur expliquions le retentissement des explosions dans nos villes. Le fait est que, pour la plupart d'entre nous, une telle situation est tout simplement inimaginable. Et pourtant, elle est bien réelle pour le peuple ukrainien. L'agression russe a entraîné des conséquences dévastatrices sur ce peuple. Comme en fait état la résolution de compromis, depuis le début de la guerre, la Russie a eu recours à un usage aveugle de la force, ciblant notamment les civils et les infrastructures civiles. Des armes explosives à vaste portée ont été utilisées dans les régions à forte densité démographique. Les couloirs humanitaires devant permettre aux civils de fuir la violence ont été ciblés. On fait rapport d'un nombre croissant de cas de viol et d'agressions sexuelles utilisés par les militaires russes comme armes de guerre. La Russie tente également d'instrumentaliser militairement les denrées alimentaires en bloquant l'exportation de millions de tonnes de céréales, notamment à destination de pays en développement. En avril, le Parlement canadien a adopté à l'unanimité une motion reconnaissant l'agression russe contre l'Ukraine comme étant un acte génocidaire. La motion note, entre autres actes criminels, le transfert forcé d'enfants ukrainiens vers le territoire russe. Selon le droit humanitaire international, les déportations de masse forcées en temps de conflit constituent des crimes de guerre. D'autre part, en vertu de la Convention sur le génocide de 1948, le transfert forcé d'enfants est considéré comme étant un acte génocidaire. En tant que membre de l'OSCE, en tant que parlementaire, nous devons faire tout ce qui est en notre pouvoir afin de protéger les populations civiles en Ukraine et de tenir la Russie responsable pour ces crimes odieux. Comme le demande instamment la résolution de compromis, il incombe toujours au gouvernement des pays membres de l'OSCE de soutenir les efforts visant à documenter les crimes de guerre et à contrer la désinformation russe. Il est également impératif que nous continuions à faire augmenter le coût de la guerre pour la Russie, notamment en imposant de nouvelles sanctions robustes qui restreignent l'accès au système financier mondial et interdisent l'importation et l'exportation de biens, de services et de technologies pouvant servir à financer la guerre du président Poutine. Les combustibles fossiles constituant l'une des sources de financement principales de la guerre russe, il nous revient d'en réduire le degré de dépendance à l'échelle internationale dans une perspective de lutte contre les changements climatiques et de protection des droits humains. Je me réjouis d'ailleurs des mesures prises le mois dernier par l'Union européenne visant l'élimination progressive des importations de pétrole brut, entre autres produits pétroliers russes, sur un échéancier de 6 à 8 mois. En tant que députée du Québec, je peux vous assurer que notre nation tient à jouer un rôle constructif dans le processus de diversification afin d'améliorer l'efficacité énergétique et d'accélérer le déploiement d'énergie propre à l'échelle internationale. Chers collègues, comme le démontrent les activités du groupe de contact tripartite et de la mission spéciale d'observation, ainsi que diverses missions d'observation électorale, l'OSCE et son assemblée parlementaire ont toujours fait preuve d'engagement productif envers l'Ukraine. Nous voici réunis pour notre session annuelle en pleine crise. Saisissons cette occasion pour renforcer notre engagement en mettant en place des mesures concrètes pour venir en aide à l'Ukraine. Je vous exhorte tous à appuyer la résolution de compromis. Merci.
Thank you, Ms. Christina Michaud from Canada. The last speaker on my list is Mr. Ahmed Arslan from Turkey. Mr. Ahmed Arslan, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, dear colleagues. I will speak in Turkish. There will be translation into following me. Öncelikle ev sahipliği için Birleşik Krallık makamlarına teşekkürlerimi sunmak istiyorum.
Mr. President and distinguished colleagues, first of all, I would like to thank you to the UK authorities for hosting us.
Bu yılki AGİT Parlamenterler Asamblesi'nin yıllık oturumu maalesef Rusya Federasyonu'nun Ukrayna'ya karşı 24 Şubat'ta başlattığı savaşın neden olduğu olağanüstü koşullar altında düzenlenmekte.
This year's annual session of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly is unfortunately held under extraordinary circumstances caused by the war launched by the Russian Federation against Ukraine on February 24th.
Son olarak Odessa ve Kremçuk şehirlerinde düzenlenen ve sivil kayıplara neden olan saldırılardan üzüntü duyduğumuzu ifade etmek isterim.
And finally, we've heard about the attacks in the cities of Odessa and Kremenchuk, which caused civilian casualties, and we feel really sorry about it.
Bu savaşı durdurmaya yönelik ülkemizde dahil çeşitli taraflarca yürütülen tüm diplomatik çabalara rağmen can kayıpları sürüyor. Ukrayna şehirleri ve sivil altyapıyı tahrip ediyor.
Despite all the diplomatic efforts made by various parties, including our country, to stop this war, casualties still continue, and Ukrainian cities and civil infrastructure are being destroyed.
Bu savaş küresel çapta olumsuz sonuçlara yol açıyor. Örneğin gıda güvenliği alanında kaygı verici bir durum mevcut.
This war also has negative consequences on a global scale. For example, there is a worrying situation in the field of food safety.
Enerji piyasası ve mali piyasalardaki dalgalanmalar gelişmekte olan ülkeler içinde riskler yaratıyor.
Fluctuations in the energy market and financial markets create risks for developing countries.
Türkiye böylesi zor bir dönemde Ukrayna'nın yanındadır. Ukrayna'nın uluslararası tanınmış sınırları içerisinde bağımsızlığını, toprak bütünlüğünü ve egemenliğini güçlü bir şekilde destekliyoruz.
Turkey stands by Ukraine in such a difficult time. We strongly support Ukraine's independence, territorial integrity and sovereignty within its internationally recognized borders.
Ülkemiz Montreux Sözleşmesi'nin lafzına ve ruhuna uygun ve hassas bir şekilde uyguluyor. Ukrayna'daki durum Montreux Sözleşmesi'nin önemini bir kez daha ortaya koydu.
And Turkey implements the Montreux Convention in accordance with its letter and spirit and sensitively. The situation in Ukraine once again revealed the importance of Montreux Convention.
Bugünkü çatışmalar Karadeniz'e daha fazla yayılmadıysa bu Türkiye'nin izlediği sorumlu tutum sayesindedir.
If the conflicts have not spread further to the Black Sea today, it is thanks to Turkey's responsible attitude.
Aynı zamanda savaşın sona ermesi için en üst düzeyde yoğun çaba sarf ediyoruz. Nihai çözümün diyalogla, diplomasiyle mümkün olacağına inanıyoruz.
At the same time, we are working hard to end the war at the highest level. We believe that the final solution will be possible through dialogue and diplomacy.
Taraflarca talep edildiği takdirde ülkemiz bu doğrultuda kolaylaştırıcı rolünü sürdürmeye hazırdır.
If requested by the parties, our country is ready to continue its role as a facilitator in this direction.
Ayrıca savaşın insani sonuçlarının hafifletilmesi için yoğun çaba sarf ediyoruz. Birleşmiş Milletler başta olmak üzere uluslararası teşkilatlarla yakın işbirliği içerisindeyiz.
We are also working hard to mitigate the humanitarian consequences of war. We are in close cooperation with international organizations, especially the UN.
Ukrayna'ya ait tahılın Karadeniz üzerinden ihracının sağlanması ortak çabalarını destekliyoruz.
And we support joint efforts of exporting the Ukrainian grain over the Black Sea.
Öte yandan ülkemizin Ukrayna'ya ve Ukraynalı mültecileri ağırlayan komşu ülkelere insani yardım sevkiyatları sürüyor.
On the other hand, our country and humanitarian aid shipments to neighboring countries hosting Ukrainian refugees continue.
Ayrıca savaştan kaçarak ülkemize sığınan yetim çocuklar dahil Ukrayna vatandaşlarına her türlü yardımı imkanlarımız ölçüsünde sağlamaya çalışıyoruz.
In addition, we are trying to provide all kinds of assistance to the citizens of Ukraine, including orphans, who become refugees in our country by fleeing the war within our means.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ahmet Arslan from Turkey.
Teşekkür ederiz başkan. Kaydettin galiba.
The list is now of speakers is now gone through. The debate is closed. I will give the floor. It's Senator Wicker. I will give the floor to Senator Wicker if he have any comments on the interventions from the debate. The floor is yours.
No, Madam President, thank you very much for that opportunity. I think we're ready to proceed with amendments, and I know that we'll have further debate on the very same topics as these amendments proceed. So if the chair wishes, I think we should move to that portion of our debate today.
Thank you, Vice President Roderick. So let's go further on. We will now vote on compromise supplementary item number 1 paragraph by paragraph, and on the 10 amendments to it which have been tabled, and on a manuscript amendment. I remind members that under Rule 22 of the Rules of Procedure, the only members who may speak are the mover of the amendment or another member in favor, and one member opposed. And the principal sponsor of the supplementary item in this case is Vice President Wicker. Speeches on amendment will be limited to 1 minute. We will now vote on paragraph 1 to 6 of the supplementary item. Any objections? No. Paragraph 1 to 6 is agreed. And now we come to amendment number 1, to add a new paragraph after paragraph number 6. And I understand that the sponsor have an oral amendment to this amendment. I call Mr. Hudson to move the oral amendment.
Thank you, Madam President. Since I fielded this amendment for consideration, the Russian Federation also blocked the extension of the mandate for the OSCE project coordinator in Ukraine. This office has supported Ukraine's reforms and helped the country meet crisis-related challenges. Its project actively contribute to major transformations critical for the stable and democratic future of the country. If agreement is possible, an oral amendment is in order, specifically a reference to the project coordinator in Ukraine, PCU, to the OSCE border observation mission, recognizing its important work and unfortunate closure.
Thank you, Mr. Hudson. Do anyone wish to speak against the oral amendment? I don't see so. Do Mr. Wicker, Vice President Wicker, wish to comment?
Yes, Madam President, as I understand it, we need to be unanimous about this, and so I would suggest that we adopt the amendment by unanimous consent.
Thank you, Senator Wicker, Vice President Wicker. Now we will go to the vote on the oral amendment number 1. May I ask those in favor raise the voting card? Thank you. Please put them down. May I ask those against raise the voting card? Thank you. Abstentions? Raise your card. Thank you. 1 abstention. The oral amendment is adopted. Thank you. But it's
we have to agree the amendment as amended.
Okay, so now we have to go further on here, and now I call Mr. Hudson to move amendment number 1.
Thank you, Madam President. And let me first say how wonderful it is to be here in this room with all of you, my dear friends and colleagues. It's great to be back in person for this annual meeting. The amendment before you, Amendment 1, addresses the special monitoring mission to Ukraine.
Okay.
Although Russia's war against Ukraine and its people has brought to an end the OSCE's presence on the ground, I think it's important that we acknowledge the important work that was done there, particularly by the Special Monitoring Mission since 2014. It's important to note the dedication of those who served on this and other missions, often under very difficult circumstances. The SMM served for years as our eyes and ears on the ground in Ukraine. It reported objectively and accurately on what was happening, countering Russian assertions and attempts to deceive the world of what its intentions really were. The work of the SMM to Ukraine is deeply appreciated, and I would urge my colleagues to support this amendment so we can acknowledge this important work. And with that, Madam President, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Hudson. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? I don't find so. Does Mr. Wicker wish to comment?
Madam President, I certainly support the amendment, and I congratulate my colleague, Mr. Hudson, for wanting to stress the important contributions made by the Special Monitoring Mission since 2014. So I will be voting in favor of the amendment.
Thank you, Vice President Wicker. Now we have to vote. Those in favor, please raise your card. Thank you. You may take down the card. Those against, please raise your card. No. Abstentions, please raise your card. Well, thank you. The amendment is adopted. Let's go further on. We will now vote on paragraph 7 to 14 of the supplementary item. Any objections? No. I would like to ask you, those in favor, please raise your card. No, thank you. Those against, please raise your card. No. Abstentions? No. The paragraph 7 to 14 are agreed. Thank you. Now we go to amendment number 2. I call Mr. Gallego to move amendment number 2 to add a new paragraph after paragraph 14. Do Mr. Gallego wants to have the floor? The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. This amendment expresses the ongoing Russian threat is not limited just to Ukraine, but now is extending to the Baltic states, Central and Eastern Europe, and the Black Sea region. And the Russian Federation's efforts to employ energy, trade, and military threats as a means of blackmail and intimidation. I had the pleasure of visiting our Baltic friends a couple weeks ago. I'm also the chair of the Baltic Caucus in Congress, and we have been deeply concerned with the ongoing threats that are coming towards our friends there, and now have just recently returned from Romania and have also observed some of the same. So I hope that we can move this, and I think it would enforce our position as friends of these states. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gallego. Now I ask if anyone wishes to speak against the amendment. I don't find so. Do Vice President Wicker wish to comment? The floor is yours.
I think Mr. Gallego has adequately explained his amendment, and I certainly do support it, Madam President. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Vice President Wicker. We will now vote on amendment number 2. Those in favor, please raise your card. Thank you. You may take down the card. Those against amendment number 2, please raise your card. No, thank you. Abstentions? Thank you. The amendment is adopted. We will now vote on paragraph 16 to 21 of the supplementary item. Any objections? No. And I was just told here, if there is no objections, the paragraph 16 to 21 are agreed. Thank you. Let's go further on. I call Mr. Cohen to move amendment number 3 to add a new paragraph after paragraph 21. Mr. Cohen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam President. This is a rather simple resolution. I would move its adoption. It just makes clear that Vladimir Putin is responsible for the destruction and the acts that have taken place in Ukraine, that the people of the Russian Federation don't necessarily support this war, and if they knew that it was a war and not a special military operation, although a special military operation may be worse than a war because it may encompass all of the war crimes that have been committed under the direction of Vladimir Putin, it makes it clear that Vladimir Putin is the person responsible. So I would move that we adopt this and make it clear that Vladimir Putin is responsible for these acts and the violations and not the people of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? I don't see so. Does Vice President Wicker wish to comment?
Madam
Please.
President, Mr. Cohen has made a valuable point. The people of Russia are poorly served by their leadership and have been for years and years. It is Vladimir Putin who is responsible ultimately for the genocide and war crimes, and I think it's most appropriate for this amendment to be adopted to point the finger precisely where it deserves to be.
Thank you, Vice President Roger Wicker. We will now vote on amendment number 3. Those in favor, please raise your card. Thank you. You may take down the card. Those against, please raise your card. Thank you. Abstentions, please raise your card. Thank you. The amendment is adopted. I will now call Mr. Wilson to move amendment number 4 to add another new paragraph after paragraph 21. Does anyone wish to speak? Mr. Wilson, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. Putin is responsible for the war against Ukraine and its people, with illegitimate Lukashenko complicit. Had Lukashenko not put Belarus at Kremlin's disposal, the options available to Putin would have been limited. Let us be clear that we stand with the oppressed people of Belarus, who voted in August 2020 for change, who want to be free, who oppose the war, and who see no contradiction between having good relations with their Russian neighbor to the east and with Europe to the west. They oppose Lukashenko as illegitimate, his repression at home, his servile support for Putin's war. We can make that stand clear by adopting this amendment for the people of Belarus. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Does anyone wish to speak against amendment number 4? Yes, please.
I am not against it, but if Mr. Wilson agreed, we might add something about responsibility of the countries and the companies which are violating the sanctions because they are fueling Russian aggression to Ukraine. So if you can get a wording to add something on that.
Thank you, sir.
Madam President.
Yes. As it was a question to Mr. Wilson, I will give the floor to Mr. Wilson. The floor is yours. Thank you.
I would accept the wording as proposed.
Madam President, let's make sure what we're agreeing to. And if I might, I would ask unanimous consent that the proposal be reduced to writing, that we move on to other amendments, and once it has been reduced to writing and read precisely to the membership, then we'll know exactly what we're voting on. I would make that as a unanimous consent request.
Thank you. Thank you. So we will pass it over and leave this for the moment and then return later. Yes, thank you.
And might I suggest, Madam President, that this would be an appropriate time for Mr. Wilson and our fellow delegate to get together on the wording while we move to other matters.
That sounds very good, that Mr. Wilson will get together with the delegates to find a way forward. Thank you. We will now vote on paragraph 22 to 26 of the supplementary item. Any objections? No. I find that paragraph 22 to 26 are agreed. I now call Ms. Potokova to move amendment number 5 to amend paragraph 27. Ms. Potokova, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. Initially, I proposed this amendment because I suppose that this is not important whether or not participating countries are directly neighboring Ukraine. But after discussion with my colleagues from Romania and Slovakia, I propose only to change wording of this amendment as follows. Not to delete the text as I originally suggested, but to change it for particularly those in proximity of Ukraine. Because from my perspective, there are states that accept refugees, integrate them, and show their maximum solidarity, and they are not directly neighboring, but situated in the proximity of Ukraine. And that's why we should appreciate their response and express our respect to all of them equally.
Thank you, Ms. Potokova. If I understand, you would like to change the wording of the amendment.
Yes. I don't want to delete it anymore, but to change it for particularly those in proximity of Ukraine.
Thank you, Ms. Potokova. The amendment sounds like particularly those in proximity of Ukraine, particularly those in proximity of Ukraine. I would first like to, if anyone wish to speak against the amendment. Yes, please, Mr. Mukita Potorayev, head of the Ukrainian delegation. Yes, please.
Dear friends and colleagues, it will be hard to me now to speak about this amendment. Why? Because we appreciate the great help of all countries that give us their hands in these hard times. My mother and father now stay in Norway. And Norway government and people take care about them. And I am thankful. Close relative of my wife lives with her 2 children in Czech Republic in absolutely comfortable conditions with great help of Czech government and people. And I am thankful. I have friends which stay now in Slovak Republic, in other countries, but I want to assure you that any person who was at the first week of March at Warsaw railway stations, every person who visited Warsaw railway stations, Warsaw Central, Warsaw Eastern, can imagine what hell is. I was there. I was there. I saw thousands of people sitting and lying and sleeping, even on the ground. I saw hundreds of Polish people bringing everything, including hot tea, hot soup, at least something to help Ukrainians to spend another cold night. And again, I am personally very thankful to all countries. But I ask you, my dear colleagues and friends, please, let's admire the great efforts that were made, especially by neighboring countries of Ukraine. And with great thanks to our Polish friends, brothers and sisters. Thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to explain you our attitude, our logic, and our feelings. But again, we are thankful to every state and every person. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Protorayev. And I ask, now I give the floor to Mr. Wicker, if he wish to comment.
Well, Madam President, where we are on this matter is that the oral amendment has been objected to, and therefore it is not in order. I think it is now in order, if we might, to hear from the author of the amendment, Ms. Potachova, because we are back on the original amendment, the amendment to the amendment having fallen with an objection.
Thank you, Vice President Wicker. I will give the floor back to the writer of the amendment, Ms. Potokova. The floor is yours. Thank you.
I know, maybe I'm not sure if I understand correctly. Now you want me to tell if I agree with the original text as been suggested?
Yes, that's correct. I ask if you agree with the original wording, because that's what I found out there is support for. Or if you stand for the oral.
Okay, then I withdraw this amendment and I agree with original wording.
Thank you, Ms. Podkova. Now, we will vote on the original voting.
No, she's withdrawn the whole amendment.
No.
Madam President,
No.
I do believe the amendment can be withdrawn by the author, and so the question I would submit is no longer before us, and we should move on to the next item.
She's withdrawn the amendment.
Okay.
So we just have to agree the paragraph.
Okay, I understand now that the amendment is withdrawn. Is that correct?
Yes, it's correct.
Thank you, Madam. Now we will vote on just on the paragraph. Any objections? No. Paragraph 27 is adopted. Let's move further on to amendment number 6. I will now call Ms. Potokova to move amendment number 6 to add as a new paragraph after paragraph number 27. Ms. Potokova, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam President. I hope this will be a little bit easier. I'm hereby proposing this amendment because I feel that it's extremely important to express huge thanks and gratitude to all members of charities, non-governmental organizations, volunteers, and to all those anonymous common citizens who keep providing their helping hand to refugees of war, and also to their relatives who decided to stay home even if it is in the middle of a war zone. These efforts should not go unnoticed. This terrible war is not, unfortunately, over, and in the next months it will be enormously important to keep this empathy for all people suffering from injustice, cruelties, and atrocities of this unprecedented attack against state sovereignty, fundamental human rights, and against our values. Because after all, these elementary principles work as a glue that keeps all of us together, and whoever breaks these principles so violently and ruthlessly should be ostracized, clearly marked, sanctioned, and excluded from the civilized world.
Thank you, Ms. Potokova. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? I don't see so. Does Vice President Wicker wish to comment?
Yes, I do, Madam President. I want to congratulate Ms. Potokova for this amendment, which of course recognizes the voluntary and non-governmental organizations that have participated. I had the opportunity in mid-March to visit Poland near the community of Rzeszów, which is near the Ukrainian border, and witness firsthand the number of voluntary organizations who have participated there. But also, let me just take this opportunity to thank Ms. Potokova for her graciousness in the way she responded to the discussion of the last amendment. I think it brought about a feeling of unity in this assembly, and I particularly wanted to commend her for that. So I will be voting for this amendment and urge a yes vote.
Thank you, Vice President Wicker. We will now vote on amendment number 6. May I ask those in favor, raise their voting card. Thank you very much. Those against, please raise your voting card. Oh. Abstentions, please raise your voting card. No. The amendment is adopted. We will now vote on paragraph 28. Any objections? Paragraph 28 is agreed. Now we go to amendment number 7, and I call Mr. Vassey to move amendment number 7 to add a new paragraph after paragraph 28. Thus, Mr. Vassey, the floor is yours.
Madam Secretary, Mr. Veazey is not here, so if I could be substituted in lieu thereof, Mr. Cohen of the United States.
Yes, please, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. What Mr. Veazey was proposing is that this has all the attributes of a genocide, that it's been discussed by many about the actions to kill civilians, to rape children, as well as women and men, to deport children and take them to Russia, to make them Russian citizens, to take away their Ukrainian identity, to take away the use of Ukrainian languages in Ukraine, etc. There have been so many indices of genocide which have been defined in our laws of the Genocide Convention that we should at least give notice of that, so in some way maybe this could temper the conduct so that it doesn't rise to a genocide that just has to be proven or shown afterwards by condemnation and conviction, but on the front end possibly prevention by the recognition of the possibility and the facts that rise to that level. So with that, I'd move the adoption of the resolution.
Thank you, sir. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? I don't see so. Do Vice President Wicker wish to comment? The floor is yours.
Indeed, Madam President, I think it's important to put forward the definition of genocide, and we note in the formal title of the Genocide Convention, including not only a need to punish genocide where it occurs, but also to prevent it in the first place. So I urge a yes vote.
Thank you, Vice President Wicker. We will now vote on amendment number 7. Those in favor, please raise your card. Thank you. You may take down the card. Those against, please raise your card. Thank you. Abstentions? No. The amendment number 7 is adopted. We will now vote on paragraph 29 to 31 on the supplementary item. Any objections? No. Paragraph 29 to 31 are agreed. Thank you. I now call Mr. Cohen to move amendment number 8 to add a new paragraph after paragraph 31. Mr. Cohen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. This would make clear that the Russian Federation has occupied Crimea and started conflicts in other places in Ukraine since 2014. And we have noted this and made objections to it. Words matter and those are important, but that we need to go forward and make clear that we show that the response has to be that we agree on what should happen, and the point of this amendment is we cannot accept the Kremlin determining the OSCE response for us. The Kremlin has done everything it can to tear up, destroy, abrogate, spit on, stomp on the Helsinki Accords. And accordingly, we need to pass this amendment. I'd move adoption.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? Do Vice President Wicker wish to comment? The floor is yours.
Madam President, perhaps if we had approached this issue more firmly in 2014, we wouldn't be where we are today. I think it's an important addition and makes the resolution stronger. So I urge its adoption.
Thank you, Vice President Wicker. We will now vote on amendment number 8. Those in favor, please raise your card. You may take down the card. Thank you. Those against, please raise your card. Thank you. Abstentions? Thank you. The amendment is adopted. We will now vote on paragraph 32. Any objections? No. Paragraph 32 is agreed to. Thank you. I now call Mr. Lopatka to move amendment number 9 to add a new paragraph after paragraph 32. Vice President Lopatka, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Dear President Margareta Cederfeld, dear colleagues, parliamentary dialogue on Ukraine is so important. And we have this dialogue since the beginning of our annual session. And we have to continue after our session. There is no greater challenge facing the OSCE and indeed the world than war in Ukraine. Therefore, our Parliamentary Assembly should play a strong role in this dialogue, which is reflected in this amendment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vice President Lopatka. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? No. Does Vice President Wicker wish to comment? The floor is yours. Thank you.
There being no objection from the Ukrainian delegation, I suggest that we move to adopt the amendment.
Thank you, Vice President Wicker. We will now vote on amendment number 9. Those in favor, please raise your card. Thank you. You may take down the card. Those against, please raise your card. No. Abstentions? None. The amendment is adopted. Thank you. I now call Mr. Aldag to move amendment number 10 to add another new paragraph after paragraph 32. Mr. Aldag, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First off, on behalf of my colleague, Dr. Hedy Fry, I'd like to thank my Ukrainian, American, and Lithuanian colleagues for this compromise resolution, which we fully support. The amendment being proposed would add an operative paragraph to the compromise resolution on the global threat posed by nuclear weapons. At present, the compromise resolution mentions nuclear threats only in its preamble. The proposed amendment condemns Russia's threatening nuclear rhetoric and recalls that all nuclear weapon states, including Russia, have affirmed that a nuclear war can never be won and must never be fought. The rationale for this amendment is clear. The dangerous nuclear rhetoric recently employed by President Putin and other Russian officials represents a serious threat to global peace and security. Russia's nuclear rhetoric is designed to intimidate Ukrainians who are bravely standing up against this illegal and immoral war, to intimidate Sweden and Finland and to dissuade them from joining NATO, and to intimidate countries from the OSCE region, including the Baltic states, who are rightly supporting Ukraine with the tools it needs to defend itself. While President Putin's attempts at intimidation are failing, his nuclear threats are nonetheless destabilizing. Russia's nuclear brinkmanship risks undermining the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, the cornerstone of the nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament regime. This amendment calls on state parties to the NPT to recommit to the treaty's obligations on nuclear disarmament with the ultimate goal of achieving a world free of nuclear weapons. As members of the world's largest regional security-oriented parliamentary body, we must do everything in our power to ensure that our multilateral agreements and commitments on nuclear disarmament, non-proliferation, and risk reduction are upheld. I ask for your support for this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Aldag. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? No. Do Vice President Wicker wish to comment? The floor is yours.
Yes, Madam President, I support the amendment, and I congratulate Dr. Fry for offering it and Mr. Aldag for explaining the purpose. Clearly, Vladimir Putin's rhetoric threatens nuclear action. It is repulsive and needs to be condemned. And this paragraph would do so. So I hope we will adopt it unanimously.
Thank you, Vice President Wicker. We will now vote on amendment number 10. Those in favor, please raise your card. Thank you. You may take down your card. Those against amendment number 10, please raise your card. No. Abstentions, please raise your card. No. The amendment is adopted. Thank you. We will now vote on paragraph 33. Any objections? Paragraph 33 is agreed to. I now call Mr. Potorayev to move the manuscript amendment to add a new paragraph after paragraph 33. Mr. Potorayev, the floor is yours.
Madam President, Artur Gerasimov from Ukrainian delegation will present this manuscript amendment. Dear colleagues, dear Madam President, today in the morning, Standing Committee unanimously started procedure of launch and change of our rules and procedure. And we unanimously voted for starting work with the following text, which now will be presented as a manuscript amendment to this supplementary item. It was distributed, it was printed with purpose for you to understand it more clearly, but I will read it. Insert the following new paragraph after paragraph 33. Calls on the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly Standing Committee to amend the Assembly's rules of procedure so that in case of the violation of the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of the OSCE member state by one of the member states, the OSCE principles and commitments and Helsinki Final Act, the credentials of the national parliamentary delegation of this member state should be challenged, and the President shall appoint a credentials committee which shall report its recommendations forthwith to the Bureau for decision to postpone the mandate of the delegation until the significant changes in the policy of the mentioned member state will proceed. This is the full text of this amendment. It was distributed, it was printed, it was also discussed and approved with Secretariat of the Assembly, and strongly following the text, we unanimously voted during the Standing Committee. I kindly ask the Assembly support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Artur Gerasimov. Do Vice President, yes, does anyone wish to speak against the manuscript amendment? No. Do Vice President Wicker wish to comment? The floor is yours.
Madam President, I think this language represents a great deal of give and take that has occurred since this morning, and I think it reaches a satisfactory result in that the President in such an event is to appoint a credentials committee to send forth recommendations. That being the case, I would hope that we could proceed to the amendment without objection at this point and then adopt it by a show of cards. So I ask unanimous consent that the paragraph be considered.
Thank you, Vice President Wicker. We will now vote on the manuscript amendment. Those in favor, please raise your card. Thank you. You may take down the card. Those against, please raise your card. Thank you. One. Yes, it's one. Abstentions, please raise your card. It's one. The manuscript amendment is adopted. Thank you. We will now vote on paragraph 34. Any objections? Paragraph 34 is agreed. Thank you.
We need to ask about...
Yes. And now I will go back to the amendment number 4 that was moved on. What do Mr. Wilson say about amendment number 4? The floor is yours. Thank you.
Madam President, I'd like to move that we support the amendment as it is, and then consider the amendment by the delegation from Albania second.
Okay, thank you.
Madam President, if
Yes.
I might.
I just got advice here that the amendment, if it was going to, please explain it in proper English here.
Well, I'll try. It depends on the what the Albanian amendment is. If it is an amendment to amendment number 4, then we have to consider that before we adopt amendment number 4. We can't then adopt amendment number 4 and then change it.
May I, please?
If the Albanian amendment is an amendment to some other part of the text, then we can adopt amendment 4, and if the plenary is prepared to accept a late oral amendment, then we can proceed to modify a different part of the text.
May I?
I give the floor after this. Thank you for the clarification. And now I will give the floor to Senator Wicker. The floor is yours.
Well, Madam President, I think the delegate who is offering the new language would explain it thusly, and I would yield to him to see if I've stated it properly. His position now is that Mr. Wilson's amendment should be adopted as written. After the vote on that, which I assume would be a positive vote, then the delegate would offer a separate amendment, and of course, according to our procedures, we would need unanimous consent for that. We would listen to the language. If it proceeds to the floor without objection, then we'll vote on the substance of that. And would my colleague verify that I have correctly stated the situation we find ourselves in?
Thank you, Vice President Wicker. And by this, I will give the floor to the Albanian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Wicker. And I really support the amendment of Mr. Wilson as it is. And I do propose as an oral amendment, you know, what I said before. And if I can state, the oral amendment is that we hold responsible government and non-government actors that do violate international sanctions on Russia.
May I ask you to repeat the oral amendments once again, sir? Thank you.
So my amendment, oral amendment, is we hold responsible government and non-government actors that do violate international sanctions on Russia.
Thank you, sir. And where do you want it to be?
Maybe after this amendment of Mr. Wilson, if we can add another paragraph, please.
Okay, so if I understand...
As a separate one.
A separate paragraph. Now I will listen to the experts here. Thank you.
We'll leave it as it is now because it creates more time.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's go back and vote on amendment number 4. We have heard Mr. Wilson's argument. I have asked those who want to speak against, and I have given the floor to Vice President Wicker. Are you ready to vote on amendment number 4? Yes. The full amendment as it is written. Now I ask those in favor of amendment number 4 as written, please raise your card. Thank you. You may take down your card. Those against amendment number 4, please raise your card. Thank you. Abstentions, please raise your card. It's 1, 2. Thank you. The amendment number 4 is adopted. And now, there is the Albanian oral amendment. And I will call, I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, but I give the floor once again to the Albanian gentleman to speak in favor of the Albanian oral amendment. Thank you.
So my name is Fatri Mediu, I'm a member of the Albanian delegation. As I stated before, my oral amendment is as follows. We hold responsible government and non-government actors that do violate international sanctions on Russia. The reason for that is because I believe that who do violate these sanctions are fueling Putin's war and the killing in Ukraine.
And
Madam President.
Yes, I just want to say, if I understood, it's also suggested to be a new paragraph after paragraph 21. And I give the first, I would like to ask those who want to speak against the amendment to do so, please. No, then I give the floor to Vice President Wicker. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Madam President, we need to make sure, I support the concept of the amendment. We need to make sure that it is in proper form. Is the parliamentarian of the opinion that we can add that paragraph after paragraph 21, or should it be a new paragraph 35?
I think as it speaks about more specific, about the sanctions, I think we could add as a 35.
Well, then I would suggest that the amendment read as follows. Paragraph 35 holds responsible, with those words being underlined, government and non-government, and that if my friend from Albania would finish that sentence. Holds responsible government and non-governmental
actors that do violate international sanctions on Russia.
May I ask if you could write down this paragraph so we know exactly what's about? If you could write it down and give it to me, because now it's going around in different ways here, and I would like to see the paragraph. Please.
Okay, give me.
We will go back to the order again as soon as I just have got the paragraph correct. Thank you.
Holds responsible government and non-governmental actors. If it would just read it again.
Thank you. May I ask if this is the correct wording? Hold responsible government and non-government actors that violate international sanctions on Russia. Is this correct?
Yes, ma'am, it's correct.
Thank you.
It's correct. It's the same thing as I...
Thank you. So, by this...
Now, Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the amendment as written, that is to say, paragraph 35, holds responsible, with those words underlined, government and non-governmental actors that violate international sanctions on Russia. That we give unanimous consent to consider that amendment.
Thank you, Vice President Wicker. I will first ask if anybody objects to this paragraph. Any objection? No. And now we have to vote on the new paragraph. Those in favor, please raise your card. Thank you. You may take down your card. Those against, please raise your card. 3, 4, 5. Thank you. Abstentions? None. Thank you. The amendment is adopted. Yes. And now there is a final vote on the supplementary item. And it's to vote on the supplementary item as a whole, as amended. Those in favor, please raise your card. Thank you. You may take down your card. Those against, please raise your card. No. Thank you. Abstentions, please raise your card. 1, 2. Thank you. You may take down your card. The compromise supplementary item number 1 is agreed. Thank you. And by this, are we done? The first day of the annual session is performed, and it will be followed by... So now we will move to hall. Please, quiet. I will just tell you what's happened now. The procedural is ended. We will move to hall number 1, where the Speaker of the House of Commons, the Right Honourable Sir Lindsay Hawley, will formally welcome us to Birmingham. So let's move to hall number 1. See you there. Thank you so much.